All right, everybody. Thanks for joining. It is 2 o'clock Eastern, so we're going to go ahead and get this thing started. We have 30 minutes to do this presentation, and I have around 30 slides. So that means that we're about to be jam-packed over here. Today, we're going to be talking about Microsoft Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain Management meets Ethereum. My name is Dan Orkin. I am one of the co-founders here at Envision Blockchain. And here's some of our contact information right here in the front. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. So we typically like to tell this story such that, globalization has really led to what we call decentralized operations. Realistically, there is nothing new about decentralized operations. When you think about it, we all have to do business from, outside of our organization. And that has been shown over the course of some of our presentations and also out there with Michael Porter, such as the value chain really provides a great visualization of how one company has their supporting activities and their primary activities, and they have inbound logistics, production, outbound logistics, marketing and sales, service, and then they typically then have to work with another company. So they have, for example, the service department then would work with the inbound logistics of another one. But again, both organizations need to be able to have these supporting activities that really support all of the primary activities that an organization has. Everything from the firm infrastructure to the human resource management through technology development, along with procurement, which is, a big deal over there. This is how these organizations really end up working together, right? So there was this analysis that we provided, which is the value chain between different organizations. And this was decentralized operations. And as the name of the webinar would allude to, so we're going to be talking a pretty heavy deal today about Microsoft Dynamics 365. And for those that don't know what Microsoft Dynamics 365 is, it's a whole suite of business apps that Microsoft has to offer. It originally started as just the sales component that you see in the upper left. And then, of course, then there's marketing. It also has a customer service, which has been kind of one of their staples for a long time, along with field service. Later, they started to add more of these business applications, such as project operations, which is your project management modules, along with finance, supply chain management, which used to be called finance and operations, but now it's two separate SKUs that was separated out. You also have human resources as well, and you also have a retail component as well. And if you take a look at this Michael Porter's value chain diagram at the bottom, that's where you get this firm infrastructure, you get, the technology development, et cetera. So when you think about it, all of these business applications really does a good job within the Microsoft Dynamics 365 business application, that is, does a really good job at supporting all of these primary activities that you see here, right? So if we were to take a look a little bit into finance and supply chain management, as has been shown from a bunch of different other presentations that we've done over the course of the past couple months, you could see that it really handles everything that a business could want from the finance side and as well as the supply chain management side. So from the finance side, you have everything from accounts payable, accounts receivable, budgeting, cash and bank management, cost accounting, expense management, fixed assets, general ledger, financial reporting, and payroll. On the supply chain management side, you have everything from asset management, inventory management, IoT intelligence. You can hook up your IoT devices up to it, master planning, procurement and sourcing, product information management. It's where you control your inventory, your product, production control, sales and marketing, service management, warehouse and transportation management. So it takes everything into account all the way from sourcing the raw goods to the pick and pack, through the management of the different assets, through the production, the distribution. I mean, you name it, end to end, it's entirely contained. So, one thing that's important to consider is that, again, this is kind of existing technology, right? This is nothing new. This has been something that has been tried and true for a very long time. It used to be, an on-prem solution with Dynamics AX. Now, finance and operations, or finance has finance and operations has actually been rebranded now to finance is one module and supply chain management is another. Now it's completely cloud-based. And if you take a look at these different architecture components of how it's stood up and how it's deployed, you can see that you typically start with Visual Studio Team Services, or VSTS. Right now, it's actually called Azure DevOps for those that are familiar with that. And you also need Lifecycle Services, which is known as LCS. And you also need Microsoft Office 365 from the Admin Center. And that's all integrated together with Microsoft Azure Active Directory for the management of the individuals and the identification, of course. And once you deploy all that, everything is Azure based, and that's where you can then load up your finance and operations applications, start your configurations when you're implementing a solution like this. This is your entire ERP infrastructure and your architecture. But what's important to note, as we're going to get to some of the more, emerging technology discussions a little further on, what we also see here is that we have really two different layers that we like to call existing technology. We have the first layer, which is our cloud platform. We were talking about that's your Microsoft Azure. But then you have your databases, you have your containers, you have your integration services, et cetera. Then the second layer, we have our line of business applications, our user interfaces, the web apps or the mobile apps, and this is something that most organizations have already adopted. Most organizations are familiar with the cloud. They're familiar with different databases and containers and infrastructures, code, and so on and so forth, right? But actually, just to give one more view onto here, when you deploy your Dynamics 365 finance and supply chain management module, just to kind of let you know what it looks like from the Azure Portal view, as you could see, some of these things that we talked about. You have your databases over here, that's labeled as disks. You have your load balancers to be able to handle the traffic, network interfaces and network security groups, public IPs, your storage accounts, blob storages, that is. And then you have, your virtual machines, and that's essentially where the Dynamics 365 software is sitting in. But where does it actually meet Ethereum? Where does it meet the blockchain ledger that we were talking about with our title? So first, we need to talk a little bit about this, emerging technology, and the best way to discuss this is kind of our new technology. So before we had existing technology, we had our cloud and things like that. Now we have this new stuff that we need to now start to pick apart. And one of the really nice things that we can take a look at is this Enterprise Ethereum architecture stack. For those that are not familiar with the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, also known as the EEA, they're a standards member-driven organization, and over the course of time have published many iterations of what they call the Enterprise Ethereum architecture stack. And you can see that the stack talks about all the different components within your enterprise Ethereum architecture stack, from all the way down from the network layer, the core blockchain layer, the enterprise 3Ps, the privacy, performance, permissioning layers. You have your tooling layer, and then you have your application layer. Okay, so we all know about the application layer, right? This is where the user interfaces and things like that typically sit in. This is where our Dynamics 365 front end is really, it's really identical to. But then we have these really interesting layers such as smart contracts and blockchain network. And you could see that they're color coded. So the green is for public Ethereum, and the purplish color over here is for this private blockchain. The enterprise Ethereum is what it's called. So, this is our new technology. And just to give you an idea of what the architecture would look like for a solution that sitting on top of a blockchain network would look like, you have very similar components to what we just showed you with the Dynamics 365 architecture. So this is a solution that we developed together with, in collaboration with a few other companies that are also Enterprise Ethereum Alliance members. Just to name a few, we have iExec that we see here, we have Kaleido, we have Consensus, Intel and Microsoft were also part of this project. And, what you can see is different components of this application. For more information about the application, definitely go into the website. You can go and see a lot of information around the EEA trusted token. It's really a gamification reward type of solution. But just to talk about the architecture, see, you still have your UI, you still have your front end, your back end. This particular solution also included a trusted execution enclave for off-chain processing. So I won't go into detail as to what that's about, but just know that there's other, let's just say, off-chain solutions, or just, in your typical cloud, like in Microsoft or AWS type of a solution. This is where the TEE is sitting in. Then you have your blockchain network, and you have your smart contracts, and then you have your blockchain network, which is comprised of these different nodes, which is the Pantheon nodes, but now it actually got rebranded to Bisu. Long story short is that now we have this really interesting crossroad. We have this world of existing technology, existing ERPs, and then we also have our new world of this DApp architecture, decentralized application, right? So for here, what we kind of need to take a look at is some of the most recent advancements within the blockchain industry. And you could see right here that we like to say, don't be afraid of the Ethereum mainnet, because I want to say last May in 2020, we keep talking about the solution, or this protocol, but it's something really interesting to talk about. Microsoft EY and Consensus came to the market and have this open source project that's called the Baseline Protocol. And Envision Blockchain is very heavily involved in this open source community. And one thing that's important to note is that the Baseline Protocol is not a product or a solution. It's a B2B transformation pattern, where you can see on the next slide, what is baselining? What it really talks about is that you have two or more systems that store data and run business logic in a verified state of consistency, enabled by using the mainnet, what we're calling Ethereum right now, as the common frame of reference. So here we're talking about Microsoft Dynamics 365 that is baselined, and we'll talk about what that is in a second, that can also be in sync with another company that is using SAP, or another company that's using Salesforce, or another company that has some other system that has some database or some source that we need to keep in sync, right? And this is where we're going to start to talk about this whole Dynamics 365 finance and supply chain management, and how it actually meets Ethereum, because this Ethereum mainnet is really the glue which is keeping everything together. So one of the common questions that we always receive is, okay, so we know that there's this open source project, if you will, a protocol called the Baseline Protocol. How do we implement something like this? And we like to say, it's jokingly, it's 3 easy steps. All you need to do is you start with number 1, which is your business use case design. Your number 2, you need to build a provider. We'll explain what that is in a second. It's your provider build. And number 3, you need to connect and deploy this so that now you can start to use it. So what we'll do over the next couple slides is we'll start to talk about some of the use case design phase. So in the beginning, when the project was first open sourced by EY, Microsoft, and Consensus, there was a use case for procurement called Radish 34 that really spoke about procurement, right? So it was from the RFP process to the proposal. There was an MSA process, but that's off chain. We're going to leave that aside. And then there was a purchase order. So that when that was first introduced, see, there was a Radish 34 user interface, which was a custom web app, kind of like the DApp architecture, what we showed you before. But what we wanted to do in Envision Blockchain, having experience with the Microsoft ecosystem, specifically with Microsoft Dynamics 365, we wanted to say, well, look, this is a very, very great use case to actually put that to the finance and supply chain management module, since many of them already exist out of the box. There's very little configuration we need to do to make this use case applicable, right? So that's what we did. The second phase is that there needed to be a protocol, baseline protocol provider build. And what you're looking right here are two pictures that talk about the standards. We have standard 1 and standard 2. For purposes of the provider build, I'll just call attention to standard 2, because this is really where the APIs that need to be built in order to take your ERP system. For this particular case, it's Microsoft Dynamics 365. You need to connect it to a provider service. Remember that little roadmap that we showed you? And in there, you have different APIs, such as the iBaseline RPC, which describes the interface that provides functions to interact the agreement execution layer, i.e. blockchain. You have your iRegistry APIs, or your interface, which talks about the interface that provides functions to manage work groups, organizations, and users. This is like your permission management. You have your iVault, which describes the interface that provides functions to manage vaults and keys. Again, very important. You have your iPersistent service, which describes it describes the interface that provides functions for the blockchain clients. You also have your iBlockchain service, which describes the interface that provides functions for the blockchain clients again. And then you also have the data model, which describes all required data structures and elements at each function layer, such as API data models or account structures. So long story short is that there needs to be a provider build, and we'll show you kind of what the components would look like in the next slide, actually. So once the provider build is done, now you get to the connect and deploy part. So what you're looking at over here is the out-of-the-box modules that we had to implement in order to showcase the procurement use case to use for Radish 34. So here you have your buyer modules on the left, which talks about the procurement and sourcing module. Remember, I showed you that from some of the earlier slides, which included your request for quotation module, your purchase order, you had your vendor module, and then you also have your product information module, which managed your products. On the far right, we had your sales and marketing modules, which is used for the supplier, which would include the request for quotation module, a sales order module, a customer module, and also the product information management module to manage your products. What we needed to do, which is not out of the box, and we'll show you this in a couple seconds, is that we needed to develop now a custom Radish 34 module, which would allow you to connect to a provider stack in order to deploy the solution and actually make these transactions happen. This is where you get this Dynamics meets Ethereum, because this is literally the crossroads of where that happens. So just to expand what that module would look like from some of the earliest demos that were shown, essentially you have your Microsoft Dynamics 365, which is part of this module. You have your Envision Blockchain Connector that we'll talk about in a second. You have your Redis containers, provide containers. This is for the vault management at the time. You have your NATs. You have all these different components over here. Your zero knowledge proof containers. You have your Nethermind Ethereum client. You have your Unibright proxy. You have your Merkle trees, your Bold.js, Postgres, etc. Right, so this is what is meant when you need to connect and deploy to a provider service. The provider service essentially would have all these containers that you see right in this Radish 34 module after it's connected. Moving on to the next slide here, just to show you what this Radish 34 custom extension would look like. So out of the box, you have, for example, organization administration, payroll, procurement and sourcing, all these that we showed you before. But Radish 34 is our custom module that we had to put into here. And as you could see, this Radish 34 module included these different flows, if you will, so that it matched what the use case was actually designed to do. So you have your request for proposal, you have your proposals, you have your service operations. So we'll show you what that is in a second. And then you also have your setup. Once you install this solution, the next thing that needs to happen in order for Dynamics 365 to really meet Ethereum is, for an admin perspective, when an admin installs a solution, they have a couple steps that they need to do, and we'll describe what that is first. So first, obviously, if you're configuring the buyer role, the buyer is going to need to have the right permissions in order to do this entire type of use case for Radish 34. So for example, we are going to need to have the accounts payable manager role. We are going to need to have a purchasing agent role. We are going to need to have the purchasing managing role. And then, of course, you need to have access to this Radish 34 custom module that we built. So that needs to be done. And this same kind of thing also has to happen from the supplier side as well when the supplier's environment gets implemented. So then you'll see that once that's done, you will be able to see this Radish 34 module come up. And just to show you some of the parameters that need to be configured, we are using the Microsoft Azure Service Bus along with some middleware that we developed in order to make this connection actually happen. And you could see that you have different endpoints to set up for the different queues and topics within the Azure Service Bus. And the ID relates to the exact member that it is. So the buyer would be member 1 in this scenario, and then the supplier would be member 2 in this scenario. The way you connect to the provider service is actually seen again from the configuration side, from the admin side, is that there are some external codes that need to be put in to the vendors. For example, if you're the buyer. And then I was telling you that in a second, we'll show you what the service operations does. So you can either have the service operation run in the background as a batch process, which can be synchronized down to the minute, or you can do this on demand. But essentially what the service operations does is it allows you to integrate natively with the Microsoft Azure Service Bus through business events. And the business events is what makes this look like it's native. The business events is the native way to connect from the Dynamics 365 ecosystem outside. And the Azure Service Bus does a great job of handling business events, along with others such as WebSockets, webhooks, HTTP calls, so on and so forth. You name it. But business events is what's native to D365, so that's what we used. And you could see how this is all connecting. Some special considerations that was just discussed during the 2020 Baseline Summit is around, of course, decentralized identifiers. And I think this is important because as you'll see in the next screenshot, from a consideration perspective and the future roadmap of where D365 really meets Ethereum and kind of the next iterations, is that you want to be able to help the way that users and organizations are onboarded. So there's this concept of this global phone book. And some of these concepts were discussed, where you have your administrator, you have your DID agent, you have your website where you can publish the DID configurations in a well-known URI. You have a host, and that essentially then publishes in a phone book. If you think about it from the end user perspective, when you're in the Dynamics 365 ecosystem, right now, the way that users are onboarded or vendors or customers are onboarded is manual entry. You have to enter the name, you have to enter the account number, you have to enter the group number and all the other correlated information. However, if there was a DID that you can look them up, all the information that is attested together with that is all handled. So this is also a special consideration that we feel that it's important to discuss. So just to kind of recap what we're talking about over here is you have this Microsoft Dynamics 365 meets Ethereum. To put it all together is on the left-hand side, you have your ERP front and back end, right? Here's your application. The back end is all there within the Azure ecosystem. And then you're going to need something like the Envision Blockchain Connector to be able to connect to the provider stack. Once that's connected, you could deploy. So again, to kind of show you what the end-to-end solution looks like when decentralized operations meets decentralized applications, you have this kind of end-to-end solution cake, if you will, of existing technology sandwiched with new technology. So you have your, for example, in section one, in the layer one, you have your cloud platform, your databases, your containers, integration services, nothing new already. Most companies accept it. The second layer, which is still a little bit new to companies, this is blockchain network. Then you have your smart contracts, which are your applications that are sitting within your blockchain network. And then number four, you have your line of business applications, your user interfaces, your web apps, etc. So what's interesting, if we were to take the same look over here and actually put some names to these bullet points, is within this first layer of the existing technology, you have your Microsoft Azure, your MongoDBs, your zero knowledge proof containers, etc. That's all everyday stuff. Then you have your mainnet, which is kind of a new technology. Then within the third layer in your smart contracts, you have your ERC 1820, your registrar, you have your org registry contract, you have your verifier contract, your shield contract, etc. That's all part of this based on protocol stack. And then on the layer four, you have your D365, your Dynamic 365, you have your Envision Blockchain Radish 34 extension, etc. To talk about some of the next steps over here is we do have a workshop, which is we call this the intro to the baseline protocol 4-hour workshop, where we can actually talk to you and your company about specific use case designs, talk about provider builds, provide some options there, and then also show you how it could be very easily connect and deploy to actually get things working. Regarding connectors, a quick note is that for those that are familiar with the Microsoft ecosystem, it's been some time now, but I feel that we just need to talk about it. When you're looking at Logic Apps or Power Automate or Power Apps for their connectors to be able to connect, Microsoft solutions to the Ethereum private blockchain that they have there, this connector is deprecated. However, we would like to then point out that ours is not. And we have our Dynamics 365, the Radish 34 extension, which is available through the app source. There's a contact us button right there. So this got verified by the Microsoft app source team, and they put that into the store so that, for any questions around the solution, feel free to reach out to us. We would be absolutely more than happy to field any questions. Likewise, just a little bit about Envision Blockchain. We are a consulting and custom application development organization that provides development services. We typically leverage a series of cloud or on-prem solutions in order to provide the services. And then we also have this consultative approach and workshops because we do understand that there does need to be an education first approach. So we can provide these workshops, and we can also work alongside your teams in many different capacities to be able to provide custom development services. So again, if there's any questions, I'll wait here for a little bit longer. Feel free to send us an email at info@envisionblockchain.com, or feel free to check out our website at www.envisionblockchain.com. Or if you will, just pick up the phone and give us a call at 800-513-8334. Once again, thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate this time. Happy holidays to all. We'll see you in 2021. Thank you.